Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the rainy, bleak streets of post-war Holland to unpack Marga Mingo's The Address. It's a deeply emotional chapter for your Class 11 syllabus. But, it's not just a story about lost items. It's a literal masterclass in memory, trauma, and the sheer human predicament following a devastating war. So let's jump right into this opening scene. We begin right in the thick of things, in media res, with this absolutely chilling betrayal. Our narrator, a young woman who has literally just survived the horrors of the Second World War, stands on the doorstep of her mother's old acquaintance. And the very first thing she's met with, it isn't relief, it's pure shock. Mrs. Dorling actually says, "I thought that no one had come back." Talk about a devastating greeting, right? So let's look at this closed door. It acts as both a physical and honestly a massive emotional barrier between our narrator and her past. 46 Marconi Street, that's the titular address, and it's the one single piece of information her mother begged her to remember. But as she stands there on the step, that door is only opened a tiny chink. Mrs. Dorling is physically blocking her from entering, basically keeping the past locked away. Part 1. A door kept closed. The first rejection. Now, the narrator is exhausted from her train journey, and she briefly starts to doubt herself, like maybe she has the wrong house? But then there's the visual proof. Mrs. Dorling is literally wearing the narrator's mother's green knitted cardigan with those pale wooden buttons. The buttons are kind of faded from washing, but it's totally unmistakable. It instantly confirms she's at the correct house and completely exposes Mrs. Dorling's cold-hearted lies. And the kicker? As soon as Mrs. Dorling realizes the narrator is staring at the sweater, she half hides behind the door. So you've got to ask yourself, why pretend? Well, it all comes down to the tragic reality of human greed. See, Mrs. Dorling assumed this Jewish family had perished in the war. If no one came back, she could just keep their beautiful possessions forever. During this post-war period, it was sadly a super common phenomenon for opportunistic neighbors to just claim the abandoned property of deported families. Acknowledging the narrator means acknowledging the true ownership of everything inside 46 Marconi Street. So she shuts the door, leaving her all alone in the rain. Part 2, Echoes of the Past, Pre-War Memories. But how did a stranger end up with an entire family's heritage in the first place? It really boils down to a tragic contrast between two women. On one side, we have the narrator's mother, Mrs. S. She's kind-hearted, trusting, almost naively generous. She was just desperate to save her family's precious items from the looming threat of the war. On the flip side, we have Mrs. Dorling. She's described as broad-backed, opportunistic, and incredibly greedy. She renewed an old contact specifically to claim these valuables under the clever guise of safekeeping. I mean, the mother was so naive, she even worried about Mrs. Dorling hurting her back carrying the heavy suitcases. If we track the timeline here, we can see exactly how this theft builds chronologically. It wasn't just a one-and-done trip. First, the table silver disappeared. On the next visit, the antique plates hanging on the wall were taken. Later on, it was the large vases, and finally the everyday crockery. Mrs. Dorling systematically stripped the house bare, piece by piece, as the threat of war loomed larger and larger over the narrator's family. Part 3. The Burden of Things. The Climax of Realization. Okay, fast forward to the narrator's second visit after the liberation of Holland. This time, Mrs. Dorling's 15-year-old daughter actually lets her inside, and boom, we hit this massive emotional peak. The narrator is suddenly surrounded by familiar childhood objects, but they're trapped in this tasteless, ugly, muggy setting. It's so disorienting that her own voice sounds totally unnatural to her ears. She's surrounded by her past, yet she has literally never felt more alienated. A room I knew and did not know. Powerful stuff. Just take a look at this specific object for a second, the heavy, old-fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder. The narrator notices it immediately in the hallway. It's the perfect symbol of her severed family history, really. It's just sitting there, completely out of place, in a home that doesn't understand its true cultural, religious, or emotional worth. To Mrs. Dorling's family, it's just some heavy, cumbersome decoration. But to the narrator, it's a piece of her very soul. And then she sits at the table. She just stares at the woolen tablecloth, tracing the pattern with her fingers until they grow warm from the friction. She's looking for a specific, unrepaired burn mark on its edge, and she finds it. This incredibly tactile, sensory memory is the breaking point. Touching that burn mark forces her to realize that home isn't about physical objects at all. It's about the people who gave them life. Without her mother there, that tablecloth is just a piece of fabric in a stranger's house. Part 4. Decoding the Address. Core themes for your exam prep. Now, if you want to really nail the conceptual frameworks for your exams, we absolutely need to look at these 4 pillars together. War and displacement form the backdrop, showing how conflict strips away human lives and any sense of normalcy. Memory and trauma dictate the narrator's deep hesitation to even return in the first place. Belongings and identity highlight how we tend to anchor our sense of self in physical things. And finally, the painful necessity of letting go, because the ultimate tragedy here is that the physical anchors survived the war, but the identity they belonged to did not. This stark comparison really captures her tragic reality. Think about it. Pre-war life was filled with safety, beautiful antique plates, silver cutlery, and this deep familial trust. But the post-war reality? The narrator lives in a tiny rented room with shreds of blackout paper still stuck on the windows, a single narrow drawer holding just a handful of cutlery, and total, crushing isolation. The physical belongings survived, sure, but the beautiful life she knew has been entirely replaced by the trauma of a really empty, lonely normalcy. This quote right here, this is essentially the thesis of the entire chapter. Her heartbreaking realization is that objects are only valuable because of the context and the people attached to them. Actually, seeing her mother's beautiful silver being used casually by Mrs. Dorling's daughter instantly strips those items of their worth. Severed from her mother and her past, these physical things are just emotionally dead. Quick exam revision, the 30-second sprint. All right, let's lock in those marks by summarizing the whole narrative arc. Step 1. The naive mother trusts the opportunistic Mrs. Dorling with her valuables. 2. War breaks out, the family is brutally displaced, and tragically the mother dies. 3. Post-liberation, the narrator finally gathers the courage to return to 46 Marconi Street. 4. She actually gets inside on her second attempt, only to find the objects completely severed from their warm memories, sitting in this ugly, oppressive atmosphere. And 5, which is absolutely crucial, she leaves immediately and resolves to forget the address forever. I'm going to leave you with this provocative question to spark your curiosity. And by the way, this is a fantastic angle for your exam essays. Is forgetting the address an act of defeat, or is it the ultimate act of self-preservation? Is she giving up, or is she saving herself? By walking away and choosing to forget the address, she refuses to be anchored to a dead past in a stranger's house. Because sometimes, letting go of the past is literally the only courageous way to step into the future. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep studying, keep analyzing, and I'll see you next time.